The oil lamps flickered on the dark wooden tables, casting dancing shadows across the tavern walls. The scent of stale ale and greasy food hung in the air, a familiar combination after all these years. Serving patrons, my eyes caught every movement, every expression, like fragments of a story I longed to understand. They jeered and gossiped, oblivious to her presence, slumped in a dim corner, the king's leprous daughter. The stares she received were cruel, like poisoned darts, and I felt a familiar rage building in my chest. My touch, not just a skill, but a gift, or was it a curse? As I cleared tankards, I felt them vibrate with the tension of the contempt that radiated from those who couldn't see past their own shadows. The warmth that flowed from me, the enchantment that bloomed with every touch, was a flicker of hope in a place steeped in despair. If only the world could feel the energy that surged around me, their perception would shift. A simple human connection could transform it all. And yet, there she remained, invisible to everyone, trapped beneath a shroud of rejection and pain. "Don't get involved," one of the regulars grumbled, but the truth echoed in my mind. Who am I if I don't care? And when her eyes met mine, when she hesitated to lift her gaze, I felt something profound intertwine between us. The mark, a magical emblem on her skin, glowed subtly in the dim light. Even in the gloom, it was powerful. What did it mean? Why had the king, in his tyranny, allowed his daughter to be cast aside, as if she were a blemish on his perfect kingdom? Her lips moved in a whisper, but the sound was lost in the surrounding din. I decided I couldn't remain idle. The city was a battlefield, and the war for these souls was fought in silence. Those who laughed, who went about their lives, were merely shadows cast over the true light I longed to reveal. My touch could heal. This was my power. The king's daughter, isolated, was a symbol of all the world's cruelties. A tension mounted, like a storm about to break. I felt conflict on the verge of erupting, like a fuse stretched to its breaking point. It was a sensation that dulled the senses, a dark omen watching me. A choice began to surface in my mind: intervene or allow life to run its course, indifferent to the suffering. The uncertainty brought fear, but also a burning impulse to act. "My name," I whispered to myself as a new understanding formed. What was at stake was not just a life, but the very essence of humanity. A bridge between self and other was being forged, and I realized my journey wasn't limited to troops and weapons. The true fight was waged in the realm of the heart and soul. The king's daughter deserved a chance. The question persisted: would I give it to her? Amidst the tavern's murmur, shadows stretched long and dark, weaving past and present into a tangle of memories. As my eyes drifted across the worn walls, I was pulled back to a time when innocence flooded my being. I remembered running under the bright sun, laughing with other children. But reality soon caught up to me, and the world's harshness showed its claws. Memories surfaced like shards of glass, sharp and blinding. My talent first manifested on a humid afternoon. An old woman, bent by the weight of years and solitude, was about to drop her basket. I was just a little girl then. When I touched her, a warm wave passed between us, and the pain in her eyes dissolved like morning mist. Since then, words had been caught in my throat like a deafening cry of despair. I did good, but good was often ignored. People avoided my presence, as if afflicted by some curse. Being different was a burden, but also a gift I couldn't give up. And that afternoon, as I looked at the king's daughter in her dark corner, a connection ignited between us. The seal on her skin, a luminous emblem pulsing under the light, burned with unanswered questions. What was that mark? Did it represent her pain or her potential? A mystery shrouded in ancient rituals, carrying the silent history of a bloodline betrayed by a kingdom whose beauty was pure facade. The weight of the court and its whispering secrets enveloped me like a thick fog. I was raised in a hostile city, a land steeped in resentment, where failures were punished and the weak were crushed under the weight of others' expectations. Childhood memories vibrated in my mind, always surrounded by uncertainty and the painful question, who am I, really? What could I do for someone like her when I myself was a pariah in this society? But the king's daughter, her exclusion, her sorrow, how could I not be moved by it? Before understanding could dissipate, an inner voice began to push me toward action. War wasn't just fought with swords and shields, it sprang from empathy, from choices. How could I become the one who wielded this power? In that moment, I realized the true battle would be waged in pursuit of acceptance and truth. I was still entangled in fears and doubts about what to do. "I have to help her," I whispered to myself, my voice barely a thread. All it would take was a gesture, a human touch. With that determination in my heart, a new plan began to form. But the court's whispers would always be lurking, ready to hunt down hope and eradicate it before it could blossom. The puzzle grew more complex, its pieces moving at the mercy of invisible forces. With one last glance toward the king's daughter, something twisted inside me. What would I discover? What secrets would be revealed when I crossed the line, leaving fear and hesitation behind? The path ahead was riddled with uncertainties, but for the first time, a flame of hope flickered in the darkness. Something deep within me said that our connection could not only change her life, but alter the very current that dragged our pain-bound world. The true light was about to reveal itself. Moonlight filtered through the tavern window, bathing the worn faces of the drunkards in a spectral glow. It was almost as if the light tried to penetrate the darkness that enveloped the hearts of those present. Letting the burgeoning connection with the king's daughter settle in my mind, I left the tavern with an overwhelming urge. The city waited, full of silent faces and shattered hopes. I decided I needed to find the king's daughter again. As my legs carried me through the uneven streets, the echo of my footsteps on the cobblestones reminded me that this was the city that had given me so much, but had also stolen a great deal. A mix of determination and fear filled my being. What would happen when I found her? And, more importantly, how could I approach without invading her sacred space? Along the way, whispers about the king's daughter echoed in my ear, poisonous threads passing from mouth to mouth. "She's a disgrace. Nobody cares. The curse has consumed her." I wanted to scream at each of them, to protest their cruel and insensitive words. But a part of me knew that the only way to truly help was to act rather than remain paralyzed in silent indignation. I arrived at the hideout I'd chosen for us, an old abandoned stable on the edge of town. The smell of rotting hay and the presence of mold created an almost suffocating atmosphere, but the place was perfect for us, away from judging eyes. I hoped she would be there. A shiver of anticipation and anxiety ran through me as I looked around. The echoes of the king's daughter's solitude reverberating within me. When I entered, I found her huddled in a corner, distant and sorrowful. The skin marked with the magical seal emitted a mystical aura that illuminated her pale face. There was a power there, something others couldn't see, but which I felt like a garden on the verge of bloom. My feet hesitated for a moment, but then I crossed the symbolic divide between us and approached slowly. I couldn't help but extend my hand, letting a gentle touch form the first bridge between us. The tension in the air was almost palpable. She lifted her eyes, and the glow within them intensified. "You came," she murmured. Her voice was a mist-shrouded whisper, but there was a contained strength in her words that surprised me. "Everyone else always runs." "I'm not like them," I declared, though insecurity pulsed in my chest. All those I had seen before, like shadows, returned to my memories. The cold, disdainful faces of the court, the ironic laughter of the tavern regulars. I want to help you. A silent promise. As we talked, I told her about my gift, about how energies flowed within me, and how they might heal her. We confronted the fragility of our hopes, but also the impetus of a shared determination that could change our destinies. There were dark forces in the court, a hostile nobleman who wished to eliminate the king's daughter. But there was also a small force, the strength of two determined souls. Something profound solidified between us, a desire to achieve something great. But as we united in our quest for justice and acceptance, a shadow loomed over us. The court's secrets began to reflect within me, and the questions coursing through my veins served as a constant warning. I was aware that, by deciding to help, confrontations would soon arrive. The betrayals, the cunning plans, and the hostility of the court were drawing near. And so a storm gathered around our lives. But it was a storm I was determined to face. The nights in the city grew longer and colder, as if foreshadowing the approaching storm. Yet the connection with the king's daughter blossomed into an almost magical collaboration. Together, we uncovered the secrets of the past and the hidden connections that surrounded us. But the darkness wasn't confined to our immediate surroundings. The court's shadows watched us, imminent and menacing. We ventured into the city's bustling heart, where market rumors flowed like a turbulent river. We disguised ourselves, blending into the crowd, my mind brimming with strategies, while her eyes shone with a determination I admired. I gathered intelligence, searching for clues about the nobleman plotting against her. My power pulsed at a higher frequency, each touch of mine whispering secrets to the unseen forces that lingered in the shadows. Vendors shouted their wares, and laughter mingled with scandalous whispers. "It's happening tomorrow night. They're meeting at the palace." A voice cut through the cacophony, light and sly, like a cat stalking a mouse. I looked at the king's daughter. Her heart pounded, and I felt the energy between us surge. This was a clue. During those hours, we pieced together fragments of the sordid plans circulating. I discovered that the nobleman, a man of dark ambitions, planned an attack, using the city's own inhabitants as pawns in a cruel game. He wanted to destroy the king's daughter, not merely out of frivolity, but as a strategic move to eliminate her bloodline. In his eyes, she was a curse, and the more I knew her, the more I saw his blindness. He didn't see her as a person, but as a threat. "We need to act before it's too late," I urged, watching the night's incursions unfold around us. The city, a conscious entity in itself, beckoned to us with silent faces and the pathetic shadows we had drawn from life's canvas. I didn't want to be merely someone who brought temporary happiness. I wanted to be a changer of destiny. We finalized our plans, a clandestine meeting where the king's daughter would reveal her true enchanted power, and I would combine our strength to confront the conspirators. Every piece of information we uncovered became a source of strength, and we needed allies. But in a kingdom rife with betrayals, who could we trust? A chill ran down my spine at the thought. As our dreams took shape, a silent fear settled in, like an unwelcome serpent among finished projects. What if we failed? What would happen to the king's daughter if we couldn't stop the nobleman? The pressure intensified, and my power, which once flowed with enchanting lightness, now pulsed in a maelstrom of overwhelming feelings. In the emotional instability of our situation, a final whisper echoed in my heart. Listen to the world's signs around us. The king's daughter's gentle touch comforted my anxiety, like a faint light refusing to be extinguished. I would trust the connection that had blossomed between us. But the uncertainty of whether it was enough, whether what we were about to undertake would be sufficient to change the course, haunted me more than the shadow of the nobleman and his nefarious plans. And so we departed, with determination burning in our hearts toward the precipice. We had decided to confront what was to come, even if the path ahead was fraught with risks and doubts. The future, marked by uncertainty, was about to unveil itself. The storm's inevitability drew near. The night that followed was heavy, and the atmosphere around us carried an implicit threat. The path to the palace wound through shadows and silence, each step we took echoing with uncertainties. I knew the celebration inside the palace was a charade. The nobles danced as if nothing were at stake, oblivious to the storm about to break over our heads. Before we entered the building, I noticed a growing nervousness in the king's daughter. "What if we're discovered?" Her voice trembled through her lips. I looked into her eyes and found the courage that warmed my core. "If we're caught, we'll fight," I affirmed, determined. I felt in my heart that what we were about to do was more than an act of resistance. It was a cry for change in a kingdom suffocating under the weight of tyranny. As we moved through the palace corridors, the festive atmosphere became oppressive. Laughter and music filled the spaces, but behind the facade, I sensed the tension. We had to act before the hostile nobleman could finalize his plan. We needed information. We knew the moment our destinies would intersect was near. When we glimpsed a half-open door, the murmur of treacherous voices drew me in. As I approached, I caught fragments of the conversation. "Once the king's daughter is eliminated," a chill ran down my spine. We were facing the enemy. I had no choice but to alert the king's daughter. To counteract the oppressive atmosphere, I braced myself to move with agility. But before I could act, he appeared, the nobleman. His predatory gaze hit me head-on, and for a moment the room fell silent. "I knew you'd come," he said in an insinuating tone. His words hung in the air like a poisonous mist. There was an explicit threat in his gaze, but also an opportunity. I looked at the king's daughter, her expression a mix of fear and determination. "Your presence here is a mistake," I declared, trying to absorb all the tension around us. It was a power play, and I was ready to defend myself. What was once a lukewarm insight now transformed into burning determination. We needed to overcome our fear and face the betrayal fermenting around us. In that instant, I realized our only strength lay in the connection we had built. I knew the king's daughter needed me, just as I needed her. Words of defiance were about to be echoed, a cry resounding through the room filled with intrigue. And so, with my heart beating like a war drum, I prepared for the confrontation. It was now or never. The storm was about to break, and we were the only ones who could shape its course. The environment around us seemed to conspire against us. The palace's grandeur enveloped a heavy atmosphere of tension and dread, as if even the walls listened to the confrontation about to unfold. The nobleman, with his enigmatic smile, was a wolf in sheep's clothing, and any deception he used would be a delight to his guests. "You've forgotten the rules, my dear," he sneered, his voice smooth as poison. "No one opposes me without consequences." Rekindling my courage, I infused determination into my voice. "Your consequences are different, and you're about to meet them." The king's daughter, beside me, regained her posture. The flames burning in her eyes spiraled, reflecting every curse the nobleman uttered. We knew the battle between us wouldn't just be physical, but also one of wits. We needed a plan, now. "We know what you're plotting," I hastened to declare, stepping half a pace forward. The ambient voices, laughter and musical chords, fell silent. There were few words that could drown out the truth, and I would do my best to make that clear. "You cannot eliminate the king's daughter without others discovering. There will be consequences." The nobleman laughed, but not dismissively. There was an underlying irritation in his laughter that made me realize he was more resentful than influential. "So you ally yourself with the heiress, a decision as reckless as it is majestic. You think your magic can carry you far? The provocation hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown. The connection we had built over these days fostered a deep trust between us. With a discreet gesture, I made a subtle movement toward the king's daughter. Understanding passed between us, and we braced ourselves. "Then let's play," she whispered with a look that promised every ounce of courage she possessed. And the moment the nobleman's attention wavered, I sprang into action. Using my ability, I unleashed a burst of fluid energy toward him. The atmosphere around us shifted. The nobleman hadn't expected this. He dodged with an agile movement, but the impact of the energy created ripples around us, causing his allies and guests to stare in awe, their faces wavering between fear and fascination. That was just the beginning. As chaos advanced, the king's daughter closed her eyes for a brief moment, gathering her strength. When she opened them, I knew she felt our connection pulsing. An aura of protection emanated from her, mingling with the energy I had created. The palace guests began to scatter, laughter converting into desperate screams. The nobleman, now exposed, became a target. Seeing this, I realized the storm was no longer just about the two of us, it was collective. They were voices united against a game that tried to silence us. Now was the crucial moment. We needed to press the attack, but also protect ourselves. As soon as the nobleman hesitated, I opened the way for the next phase of our plan, feeling the weight of the burden on my back. All the power we had accumulated was about to manifest, the true storm that could permanently alter the course of our destinies. In that instant, a spirit of resistance burned within us. The balance began to shift, and the climax of the struggle was about to break against the tyranny that surrounded us. We were determined to win not only our freedom, but also the life of the one everyone considered a threat. We would be enough to face what was to come. The electrified air pulsed between us as chaos engulfed the hall. Streaks of light danced as the energy we created mingled, forming an invisible shield against the nobleman's attacks. His cold demeanor was transforming into desperation. The threatening words he'd uttered before now seemed hollow, like echoes of a past that surrounded him. "You don't understand what you're doing," he roared, trying to assert control over a situation that seemed to be slipping through his fingers. But we, curiously, were no longer the frightened shadows he had underestimated. We were the storm. The king's daughter stepped forward. "I may never have fully understood who I am, but I will not be a mere puppet in your games." Her words reverberated like an anthem, energizing not only me, but all who could hear. The nobles who were once under his command now hesitated, fear permeating their resolve. And it was that uncertainty we decided to exploit. "Let's help her." "Let's show the true strength that resides between us," I whispered to the king's daughter, knowing we weren't just individual combatants, but a collective united against oppression. Our voices intertwined, and a new energy began to emanate, vibrating through the room. The luminous glow had a tangible effect. The nobles perceived a power growing within us. The hostile nobleman tried to react, but his frustration only fueled the fire of our resistance. The more he tried to intimidate, the more united we became. With each passing moment, hope blossomed, and allies began to emerge among the court members who were disgusted by his actions. As we channeled our strength, the nobleman sought an exit, his desperation transforming into an abrupt movement. But he had made a mistake. Our allies formed a circle. The magical connection between us, like an electric current, pulsed stronger. We transformed our fear into an attack, and the emanating energy became an overwhelming wave. With a coordinated movement, we unleashed the impact of our combined energy toward him. The entire hall trembled under the power we created. The nobleman was flung against the wall, a glint of terror in his eyes as his fury vanished into the shadows. For us, that was a symbol of victory, a representation that I would take the first step toward freedom. But the battle didn't end there. We knew it. Other nobles watched askance, ready to react. And with resistance often born of uncertainty, new challenges would emerge. We would rise against tyranny in other ways, but the victory this night was a harbinger that hope was more present than we had ever realized. It was a decisive moment. The king's daughter, now strong and determined, looked at me with a gesture of gratitude, and I saw in her eyes the burning future we could shape together. Her words echoed in my heart. This was only the beginning. There's so much more to do. With a firm clasp of hands, we reunited our destinies, determined to face whatever came next. The fight wasn't just for us, but for all who dared to dream of freedom. And so, with renewed courage, we advanced into the unknown, determined to transform that night into a landmark of hope in a kingdom now in fateful transformation. In the moments that followed the symbolic victory, the hall was enveloped in a mix of euphoria and chaos. The nobleman, fallen under the weight of defeat, writhed against the wall like a shadow in battle. And those who had remained loyal to him now found themselves lost amidst uncertainty and panic. We had broken the chain of fear that surrounded him, but the battle was far from over. Whispers spread like an echo chamber, and those who remained didn't know whom to trust. I looked around, seeing faces of old allies and new, all united in the same fight for freedom. The king's daughter was beside me, still illuminated by the courage that had grown within her. Sensing the insecurity that held her, I took the lead, ready to guide them. "The time has come to choose our path," I declared, my words firm, cutting through the fog of fear that hung over us. "We cannot allow tyranny to continue to prosper. This union we have formed can be a precursor to the change we so deeply desire." The faces turned toward me were a tapestry of hope and determination. The nobles who had previously huddled in the corners of the hall began to draw closer. One of them, an old man with a worn appearance but an intense gaze, rose. "It is true that tyranny cannot be sustained without a people to support it. What was once a divided court is now an opportunity for reconciliation. Together we can change not only ourselves, but the kingdom itself." The faces turned toward me were a tapestry of hope and determination. The nobles who had previously huddled in the corners of the hall began to draw closer. One of them, an old man with a worn appearance but an intense gaze, rose. "It is true that tyranny cannot be sustained without a people to support it. What was once a divided court is now an opportunity for reconciliation. Together we can change not only ourselves, but the kingdom itself." Those who were once submissive now moved with new purpose. A wave of determination swept through the hall, and the king's daughter, now shining brighter than ever, stepped forward, her voice carrying the gravity of a leader. "Yes, we are the change, and we will not be silenced again." At that exact moment, the former festive atmosphere that had become a battlefield reflected the transformation that had occurred. Voices that were once whispers of submission now echoed in unison. We were forming a new council, a space where voices could be heard, where decisions would be made collectively, and where power would no longer be something imposed, but something shared. The old nobleman, still defeated, remained on his knees, his words now a lament. "What will become of us if we are no longer needed?" The king's daughter's gaze was firm. Responsibility is not synonymous with harm. If we desire a different future, we must decide what happens to the past. There will be no vengeance, but rather a just judgment. As her eyes shone with the light of justice, a silent pact formed among us all. The hall's lights began to brighten, reflecting every battle and scar that had been carried there. And so, with the shadow of the past finally dissipating, new paths began to unfold. a new future established upon the very foundation of unity and forgiveness. With renewed determination, we realized that not only a reorganized kingdom was emerging, but an awakening of voices and stories that had always been there, finally to be told. In that moment, we were no longer just warriors and aristocrats in a power game. We were citizens of a future yet to be written. Together, we were the architects of a new beginning, and the journey had just begun.